NBC2 News Today.
Welcome back. This morning we're joined by Dr. Cederquist, who has some important information about a very common food additive that increases the risk of heart disease. And Dr. Cederquist practices preventative medicine and weight management here in Naples. Okay, doctor, so I'm guessing the most common type is salt? Is that right?
That is correct. And the thing is, most people don't think of salt as actually a food additive. They think of it as ingredients that we add to our meals as we prepare, or table salt that we add on. And we don't think of it as really an additive. But indeed, 80% of the sodium or salt in our diet comes not from the salt shaker or the foods that we put into our cooking. It comes from processed foods, primarily frozen foods, foods at restaurants, anything. When you think of convenience, think of sodium and think of salt.
Now, I know you've looked at a recent study about salt additives. Did the subjects in this group continue to follow a low sodium diet? How did that work?
What was very interesting is this actually were two different studies that followed 3,000 people. It was actually the Stop Hypertension study, which actually looked at taking people who are at risk for high blood pressure and had them decrease the sodium in their diet by 25%. The studies lasted 2 years, and what they found is those people in the study who reduced their sodium actually did lower their blood pressure a little bit, not very, very much. But then the studies ended. But the investigators continued to follow these people peripherally for 10 to 15 years and found that those who actually were in the intervention group and lowered their sodium actually had a 25% decreased risk of cardiovascular events. That means heart attacks or strokes. And this is happening 10 to 12 years after the initial studies had ended.
And did they even notice the reduction? Could they tell from the taste of their food?
Yeah, what's interesting is, getting back to your initial question, is the people did report they continued to watch their sodium, even though they were no longer strictly in a study with someone calling them and saying, what's your sodium level, what are you doing, go to a class, et cetera, et cetera. What I think this means is that reducing sodium in your diet is not difficult if you take the time to think about it and look at it. Because what you'll end up finding is you'll find a can of soup and then another can of soup. And one will have 2 to 3 times the amount of sodium. And if you trained yourself to look at it, you'll end up picking the lower sodium brand, because in reality you really can't taste it so much once you get used to it. I had a particular personal experience a few years ago. My husband was on a plane, and he thought, oh, I'll order something healthy. I won't order a soda. He ordered that Mrs. T's Bloody Mary mix. And I said to him, I think that has a lot of sodium. I think like 1,000 milligrams. It ended up having like 2,900 milligrams. And he was like, oh my gosh, I thought I was doing something healthy. So just by taking 2 seconds to turn it around, you can leave a whole lot of sodium behind without really affecting your life.
That's an important example. What is the daily intake? What should you have in your diet? Because I doubt 3,000 milligrams of sodium for one drink. Right. Is it all appropriate?
It's excessive, and it's very, very scary. What the recommendation is for most people, 2,300 milligrams of sodium. But for those with heart disease, the recommendation is 2,000 milligrams of sodium. Now, the average sodium intake in this country ranges, in different studies that I've looked at, from 3,300 to 4,000. So some of us are having double the amount in our diet. And what's interesting is that other countries in Europe have recommended 1,600 milligrams of sodium. So I think this particular study was very, very helpful to see it's not just lowering blood pressure. It is probably doing additional things to decrease the risk of heart disease. So looking at the sodium, being aware it's there, and making lower sodium choices is a good thing to try to do.
All right, thank you. And if you have questions for Dr. Cederquist,
1-866-401-3438 or go to www.bistromd.com.